As we find ourselves in the book of Ruth, we come to arguably the most confusing and most controversial portion of the book of Ruth. When we read through this, and as we went through this, there should have been some moments where, as we were reading, you were listening to what was being said, and it should have drawn you into a moment of like, what did he just say? Make no mistake, for an individual reading the book of Ruth, this is an incredibly provocative scene that's happening here. And it is something in which is kind of weird. What we see here is, and we read it, and we read it in a delicate way, but basically here's what happens. Naomi, after hearing that Boaz has been kind to Ruth, remember we talked about the fact that Boaz saw Ruth's work ethic, saw what she had done for her mother-in-law, and then basically brought her into his house to let her go and harvest with his young women. Naomi says at the end of chapter 2, don't you know that Boaz is one of our potential redeemers? And you found so much favor with Boaz, here's what I want you to do. The harvest is ending. What we've seen here is Ruth has spent a harvest season with Boaz. Remember it said, I want you to stay with me and I want you to harvest in my field until we've harvested all the wheat and all the barley. And now we get to the point where Naomi says, tonight, Boaz is going to be at the threshing floor. This is what you do after you've collected all of your harvest. The threshing floor is a situation in which there is an elevated platform. All right, this isn't like a barn. This isn't like a hidden place. This isn't somewhere in which is kind of like dark and off to the side. What this is an elevated platform. And what you do is you take wheat and you need to thresh the chaff off of wheat. Now, I know some of you have been farmers in the past. Maybe you harvested things like grains, like wheat and barley. But for those of you who have never seen any sort of grain that hasn't been processed for you, chaff is the outside of a grain, and the best example of chaff that I can give you that you most commonly interact with in your daily life is the outside of an onion or the outside of garlic. You know that really papery stuff that comes on the outside? Chaff is very similar to that. So what you do is you take the chaff, you put it in a blanket, you shake it all up, you disturb it all over those different things, but rather than pick out the individual grains, you get a couple of guys, you take that big cloth, and basically like elementary, kindergarten style, big parachute, you guys know what I'm talking about? You give it one of those little toss-ups in the air, and the wind blows away the chaff, and the seed falls back down onto your carpet, your bedding, whatever it is you got, your sheet. You do that a couple of times, and then you take that and you store it away. And grain, after it's been threshed, can be stored kind of indefinitely. Once you process through grain, you move it into flour. In fact, a couple of years ago, there was an archaeological discovery. They were in Egypt, and they found a jar of flour that was probably processed and sealed sometime similar to the time of Moses. So we're talking about like 4,000 years ago. And they took that flour and made bread out of it. Okay, and it still worked. I don't know if anybody ate the bread. I'm not going to be the first person to eat the bread that, it's definitely cursed by a mummy. I think that's how COVID started, actually. Too soon? Are we? Sorry. But wheat can be stored. So basically you want to process through all of your wheat, which is why we see normal times during the scripture where it says we stored up a bunch of wheat to last us for these droughts and things like that. And we see that wheat lasts years and years and years and all those different things. So we have this process where they're in this place that's an elevated platform that's open to the elements. And we see that they are going about threshing. This is a pretty labor-intensive and work-intensive part of harvesting, particularly because only a couple people can be involved in the process. It's not a big room. It's not like you can have, 100 people set up. Otherwise, everyone's getting covered in chaff. So we've got this situation that's happening, and it says that Boaz is going to take the first shift. And it says Boaz is going to be threshing wheat, which means he's also going to be sleeping at the threshing floor for a couple of days. And Naomi says, all right, Ruth, here's what I want you to do. I want you to take a shower. I want you to do your hair up. I want you to put on some perfume. put on your nicest clothes, and you're going to go to the threshing room floor, hide, wait for Boaz to fall asleep, and lay on his feet. Now, this is one of those situations in which biblical scholars look at this and they try to find some sort of meaning, some sort of cultural significance, some sort of historical evidence to support something here. And there's some conversations going around of this is some ancient betrothal practice that we don't really understand. It's not something we do anymore. This is similar to like putting a hot water bottle on somebody's feet to keep them warm. It's an act of service. It's a whatever. Like there's all these people that kind of have these conversations. However, there's nothing biblically to support the fact that this is some sort of ancient betrothal process. There were individual servants that might create body warmth and things like that for individuals in the winter, but we're talking about harvest time. It's not cold. It's like August in Israel, right? In fact, he's like laying out in the elements. It would have been like a nice, like late summer evening. So people try to have this conversation, but I'm of the impression that if you were an Israelite reading this even thousands of years ago, you would have read this, and this would have been a bit of a controversy. First off, Naomi is taking charge here, which seems weird that Naomi is saying, hey, Ruth, I want you to go do this thing. But what I want you to see here, would have been perfectly normal. In fact, pretty much every marriage that happened at this time would have happened as a result of parents taking the initiative to match their children together. What's weird about it, though, is I don't know very many mothers that would be like, hey, I mean, this is like a Dolly Parton song. This is like, you know what I'm talking about? Like, I'm not going to sing. Dominique knows what song I'm talking about. All right, so ask her afterwards. But this is like, hey, I want you to doll yourself up, and I want you to go lay in this guy's bed. This should have been, and would have been taken as a very controversial and risque moment in which Naomi's plan is to put Ruth into a situation where she's spending the night with Boaz. And she says, what I want you to do is lay at his feet. And when he notices you, don't say anything. He'll tell you what to do. This should cause some uncomfortable tension for you. Now, Ruth does something really, really interesting. She does what only a child can do. She simultaneously obeys and disobeys her mother-in-law. She goes, I'll do everything you told me to do. She does most of what she told her to do. She gets dressed up. She takes a shower. She goes to the threshing room floor. It says she waits. It actually says it waits until his heart was happy. Boaz lays down for the night and she watches. She lays over his feet. But when Boaz wakes up, Boaz doesn't respond the way that Naomi responds, but I'm assuming responds in the way that Ruth knows he's going to respond. Rather than Boaz wake up and take advantage of the situation, Boaz wakes up, it says, frightfully. And he says, who are you and what are you doing in my bed? And rather than sit there quietly, wait for Boaz, Ruth takes the initiative here and she goes, I am Ruth, and you are my redeemer. She shifts the conversation back to, away from, what could have been a very provocative and controversial moment, and calls back to propriety in the context of the law. I am Ruth. You have brought me into your house. And don't you know you are my redeemer? And Boaz responds in an amazing way. Boaz looks at this whole situation, and it says that he is joyful. He says, I am so joyful. And he actually says, what you've done for me tonight is more of a kindness than anything else you've done for me. And he says, he looks at Ruth, he goes, You're a beautiful young woman. You could have gone out and found some young man. You could have sought individuals who maybe are strong, or maybe he says you didn't even go after anybody who was wealthy. Like, you could have gone about and found yourself a spouse. You could have gone out and found anybody you wanted, but you want to be with me. And he says, because of this, and because the townspeople know that you are a worthy woman. Remember, it goes back to Boaz's interaction with Ruth has never been simply physical. It goes back to the fact that she is a law-abiding individual, which seems to be more law-abiding than actual Israelites. You got to remember, Ruth was an idol worshiper. But when she goes to Naomi and says, your God will be my God, that wasn't lip service. Ruth actually lives out what it means to be an Israelite. Calls on to regularly the law and obeys the law. And Boaz acknowledges, says, everyone in town knows that you are a worthy woman who pursues the law. And I would be so happy to redeem you. But I want you to see Boaz's honor here. He obviously likes Ruth. But what he does is, the first thing he does is he acknowledges, yes, I am a redeemer. And he also says, I want to be a redeemer. It's not just enough that he legally is bound to this. He says, this is something I desire. I'm so happy that you didn't go pursue other people. I'm so happy that you want to be redeemed by me, and I want to redeem you. But he says, I need to go about it the right way. And we're going to see that he does this in a couple of different ways. But the first thing we see is that Boaz looks at this and says, I absolutely want to be your redeemer. And I am so looking forward to doing this. And I want to do this the right way. He actually says, even though I'm a redeemer, there is one person who is closer in line than me. If you remember a couple of weeks ago, we talked about if a husband were to die, the individual would go and they'd have to marry the closest relative to that son who had passed away. So typically it would be the brother. If the brothers were all married or passed away, then it would go to uncles or cousins. It would go kind of down the line. And Boaz looks at this and he knows the family tree and he says, I absolutely want to redeem you, but there is an individual who has the possibility of redeeming you. So rather than me redeeming you, here's what I'm going to do. He says, I'm going to go talk to that guy. Right? Now, if you ever have a conversation with my wife, she's going to acknowledge there are certain times, gentlemen, maybe you're on the same boat, where your wife will ask you to do something. Has this ever happened to anybody else? Okay. Never. Our timetables don't always quite line up. All right. For example, on Friday night, Dominique said, hey, she had folded laundry while we were watching a movie. She said, hey, in the morning, could you put away your laundry? I went, yes, ma'am. Saturday evening, she was folding some more laundry. And she looked around, she goes, did you put your laundry away? And I said, yes. Yes, I did. I was like, why are you surprised? You asked me to put my laundry away. He goes, yes, I normally ask you to put your laundry away. That doesn't always happen. But Boaz says, hey, first thing in the morning, I'm going to go talk to this guy. We'll see next week whether or not he does that. All right, so one of you is going to read ahead. You're going to figure it out. But he says, I want to do this right. I need to talk to your Redeemer. And he says this, if that person would redeem you, that is good. And I want to let him redeem you because that's what is right. But he says, if he's not willing to redeem you, then I will redeem you. Not only does he acknowledge his responsibility, not only does he do it the right way, he goes about it quickly. He's not going to let this go. He's going to make sure that it happens in a timely manner. And then the third thing that he does is he looks after Ruth's reputation and he looks after his own reputation. If you saw a woman who was not married to a man, walking holding her cloak from the threshing room floor with like straw in her hair, everyone's going to assume what happened. You know what I mean? Like, this is like 2000 BC walk of shame that's happening here. Like, this is like a time here where like they would have definitely known what had happened in that. So what Boaz does is he makes sure that he says they wake up before anybody can really see who anybody else is. They wake up while it's still dark outside. Because he wants to make sure, like, hey, I want you to be safe tonight. You stay here, but I want to do the honorable thing, and I want to get you home without causing you any sort of reputation. I want to get you home without anyone thinking ill of you. I want to get you home in a safe way. So he waits until it gets earlier, a little bit later in the night, but still early in the morning before you can really make out who's who. And he's going to send Ruth home. But not only does he send Ruth home looking after her reputation, he also makes sure that he looks after her. And he's going to continue to provide for her. What we see here is it says that he leaves her then with 6 measures of barley. Now again, just like last week, right? You say, well, what is a measure? Right? A measure would have been basically enough barley for one person one day. Right? So basically he says, hey, I'm going to give you and Naomi about 3 days worth of food while I work this out. Like, this is another acknowledgement. He's like, I'm going to do this pretty quickly. And he basically says, like, hey, I know you've been working in the field. I know you've been showing up. You've been doing those different things, but the harvest is done. Like, you can no longer, like, glean from the field. You can't follow my ladies around. Like, you need to be taken care of. So what he does is he gives her a number of days worth of food. And he says, I want to make sure that you don't go back to your mother empty-handed. Right? This reminds me of, I don't know if that happens in Florida, but where I'm from, if you go over to somebody's house, the first thing they ask you is, you hungry? Right? And then they're always like, oh, go ahead, take a plate with you. You know what I mean? He's looking after Ruth and Naomi in the situation. And he gives her, not just Ruth enough food, but also Naomi enough food while he takes care of this. As we draw the parallel, and as we continue to look at this story of Ruth and Boaz, there continually are opportunities for both Ruth and Boaz to behave in a way in which is not ideal or not honoring to God. A number of different times, Ruth has been given the opportunity. It would have been, I'm not going to sit here and lie to you, it would have been much easier for Ruth if Ruth would have done the same thing that Orpah did. It would have been much easier for Ruth to say, yes, Naomi, I did marry your son, but all of your sons have died. I will go back to my people. I will go back to my family. I will go back. It'd be much easier for Ruth to do that. It would have been easier for Ruth to try to find young men who maybe haven't married, who to try to find somebody who was wealthy, to try to find the easy way out. But Ruth goes to the field and works by gleaning the field. It would have been easier for Ruth to use or to manipulate her way into different situations, but she is honest. She follows the law, and she just says exactly what she wants in a situation. It would have been easy for Boaz to do whatever it is he wanted to do with her. It would have been easy for Boaz to not care about her reputation. It would have been easy for Boaz to continue to allow Ruth to glean in the corners of the field. He would have made more money. It would have been easier for him. It would have been easy for Boaz to break the law or break the commandments of God at any point here. But both individuals take the time to do it right. And the reason we look at Boaz as an image of what Jesus Christ does for us is because Ruth and Boaz, at every opportunity, when they have the opportunity to do something that honors God or do something that honors themselves, every single time they choose to honor God. I do not find it a coincidence that Ruth and Boaz are going to be the grandparents of David. I don't find it to be happenstance that Ruth and Boaz's commitment to God is blessed. Your commitment isn't based upon your ease. I don't know what your life has been like. I do know there are opportunities in life in which you can take the easy road. There are opportunities in your life in which it might be easier to do the thing that brings about the most glory for you. And I know in life, a lot of times it's a lot harder to do the thing that honors God. I also know that sometimes honoring God doesn't equate to physical success. I also know that honoring God doesn't mean everything's going to be happy and peachy and rosy. But I gotta believe that the seeds planted in obedience to God at some point will bring about a harvest that will be rich for your soul. It may not be rich for your bank account. It may not be rich for your career. It might not even be rich for your relationships. But I gotta believe that when we sow seeds of obedience in God, God brings about a harvest of righteousness. And that harvest of righteousness will lead you into a more abundant life, which is exactly what Jesus promises in John chapter 10. Jesus says, I didn't come like a thief to steal, kill, and destroy, but I came to give you life and life more abundantly. He tells that to a group of individuals who spend the rest of their lives in poverty, running for their lives. The abundance that God is calling us to is a spiritual abundance in which God brings about the fruit of the Spirit and the abundance of the soul, to where you will experience more love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Your life will be marked by the fruit of what God gives, so that that fruit can be given to the people around you, and that the community can prosper and blossom. And as we look at the book of Ruth, it'd be easy for us to look at and be like, man, I'm awesome. Jesus saved me. What you need to see in the book of Ruth is, man, God saved me. I need to do something about it. How can you honor and glorify God by serving others this week? How can you help somebody else? We've talked about it a couple times. Is there some sort of injustice in which you see somebody undergoing? Can you be the agent of change in that injustice? Is there somebody that lives around you that maybe they're lonely and maybe they don't have a lot of friends and family around them? Can you be the person that comes and gives them comfort and peace this week? Maybe there's somebody who's going through a hard time. Could you be the person that calls them and lets them know that they are not alone in that situation? Maybe there's somebody that's in the hospital this week and you need to go and visit them. Maybe you need to look at our prayer list that we have in the bulletin and you need praying for those people. And if you know one of those people, text them, call them, show up. Everyone I've talked to right now that is in the hospital and I've asked, can people come visit you? They say, absolutely. Take some time to be an agent of the gospel this week. Maybe you need to share your story with somebody. Maybe you need to invite somebody to church. Maybe you need to put some things down that you've been holding on to. Whatever it is you got to do this week, I want you to do it.